Let's begin. So we started the story of Yiftach's daughter, and this is on chapter 11. The story is that Yiftach fights the Ammon and defeats them.
What page?
It's on page 545 in this translation. First he tries to negotiate with Ammon, and that doesn't work. Then on 545 in verse number 29, V'atiya Yiftach ruach Hashem, Vayavar Gilad et Menashe, Vayavar Mitzpei Gilad, Umi Mitzpei Gilad avar b'nei Ammon. And then the next verse is Vayidar Yiftach Neder Hashem Vayomar Im Natoti Tedet B'nei Ammon Biyodi V'oya Hayotzei Asher Yetzei Midaltei Beiti Likroti B'shuvi B'shalom Mibnei Ammon Vayar Hashem V'aritiu Ola. So first of it says that over Yiftach, the Spirit of God came upon Yiftach. That's verse number 29. And then in verse 30, he takes a vow. If you will give me victory, hand them into my hands, I will dedicate the first thing that comes to greet me as a sacrifice. That's a neder. So the question is, last week I suggested that, some people here also suggested that actually the problem with Yiftach, I think this is the best interpretation, the problem with Yiftach is that, what did he mean when he said, the one who comes to greet me? So it doesn't sound like it's an animal. It sounds like it's a person. Someone who comes to greet me after the victory and we've seen that elsewhere in the Bible. We see it, for example, we see Miriam dancing at the sea after crossing the sea. We see with David and Saul, after David kills Goliath in chapter 17. So there it says that the women came out to dancing, and they came out singing, and they greeted Saul, and they said, he cut Shul Barafav David B'Rivotav, which Saul took as an insult to him. Clearly it's not an insult to him, but that's how he took it, and that began the jealousy of Saul and many attempts to kill David. But so we see that after victories, people come out. In those two cases, they're actually women who come out dancing or singing to celebrate the victory. In the case of Saul, they came out to greet Saul after David kills Goliath, because at the end of the day, David works with Saul. Saul's the king. So it sounds like what he had in mind, strangely, is that the one who comes to greet me after the war, I will bring that person as a sacrifice to God. And that the problem, obviously, is human sacrifice, that Yiftach is engaged in and wishes to engage in human sacrifice. And the point I made last week was that the nation that is identified in the Bible with human sacrifice is none other than Moab, the brother of Ammon, and actually one of the subjects of the long speech of Yiftach in the preceding section. Because the battle that Yiftach references, he talks to Ammon, but the battle in the Chumash that is referenced is Moab. And the story that follows is Balak Melech Moab, who feels that Israel has taken his land. So Moab is known, Mesha Melech Moab, and Moab is known for human sacrifice, and we have a situation where the person who is fighting the enemy actually partakes of the same crimes that the enemy, that which represents the enemy. We saw this here, and we saw with Gideon, who fights Midian. And Midian is the story of Baal Pa'ar. It's the story of Midian. And the description of what Gideon does after his victory is strikingly reminiscent of the story of Baal Pa'ar. So those are two examples of where somebody fights the enemy, but actually is sort of like the enemy. There are other examples as well. Now I came across There's a little book by Phyllis Tribble, used to be at the Columbia or Union, I forget where she was, but sort of feminist writings on the Bible. It's not clear to me that she's actually, to what degree she's actually interpreting the Bible, to what extent she's sort of reading into the Bible. It's unclear, but in a book about women, basically, the abusing of women, basically, she has a text of terror. Text of terror, that's right, text of terror. And she has a section on Yiftach's daughter. So she makes a very interesting claim about the story. I wanted to share it. It strikes me that it's not right, but we will discuss that in a minute. And the claim that she makes, actually, she doesn't see the problem with human sacrifice. I mean, she may see that, but she doesn't see that as central to the story about Moab and all that she doesn't see. But she makes a different suggestion, which I wanted to put out there for discussion. She makes the following claim. She makes the claim that in verse 29, it says, Vati al Yiftach Ruach Hashem, Vayavor et HaGilad. So upon Yiftach came the Spirit of God. And then in verse number 30, we have Yiftach saying, making a vow, Vayidar Yiftach Neder, Im Natoti Tenet Bnei Amon Biyadi, etc. So the claim that she makes is that if in fact the Spirit of God is upon Yiftach, why does Yiftach have to take a vow in the first place? Why doesn't Yiftach assume that if the Spirit of God is upon him, he will be victorious? So the neder, she thinks, is actually pointless. In fact, and where she's coming from, it's a good Christian, I guess, is actually faithless. They're big on faith. So she thinks the vow itself is problematic because it's unnecessary and demonstrates a lack of faith, because it says in the previous verse that the Spirit of God came upon Yiftach. That's what she claims. Now, I must say that...
Well, who would know better that if when the Spirit is on you, you're necessarily on the physical level successful or not, but a Christian?
Well,
who would know that better?
Who knows? The point is, my gut tells me that this is not right. But let's just, first of all, the expression, Fatia Yiftach Ruach Hashem, that expression we find elsewhere in the book of Shoftim. It's at least in three other places, that Fatia Lav Ruach Hashem, Vatitzrach Ruach Hashem Alav. We have it in three places. Maybe there's more. Three come to mind immediately. One is in the beginning of the book with Otniel ben Kenaz, who's called the first judge. So with Otniel ben Kenaz, it says the Spirit of God came over him. And we have it two more times in the story of Shimshon. The Spirit of God came upon Shimshon, and he was able to defeat the enemies. But whether that necessarily means that if the Spirit of God is upon you, that you know for sure that God's on your side, I have my doubts about that. But I thought it was interesting to think about the vow. And we have a vow in several places. Two come to mind that may be relevant to the story over here. One is, if you take a look in the book of Bamidbar, this is before the story of Sichon, chapter 21. Chapter 21, verse number 1. This was mentioned last week as well. Just want to... It says that, it's on page 332 in this translation. Vayishma Knani melech Arad Yoshev HaNegev ki ba Yisrael derech ha'atorim. So the Canaanite king of Arad heard that Israel was coming by way of Atarim. Vayilachem b'Yisrael vayish b'menu shevi. So he fought against Israel and he took captives. That's the first verse. Second verse is Vayidar Yisrael neder Hashem vayobar Im natot titein et ha'am hazeh biyodi v'acharabti et areihem. The language is very similar. So Israel took a vow saying, if you will give the enemy into my hand, that's identical to what Yiftach says. And here it's v'acharabti et areihem, I will, here they translate, proscribe their towns, destroy the towns. But cherem actually is used in a sacrificial context. So when you dedicate something fully to God, That's called the cherem. Could be through destroying the object, dedicating the object in a certain way. The Torah speaks of cherem as a dedication at the end of Vayikra. So they said, if you give me into my hand, if you give me victory, I will I'll dedicate the cities to you, probably through destruction. Vayishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael, and God obeyed Israel, hearkened unto Israel. Vayitein et haknani, vayacharem etem v'yatarehem. So there we have an example of going into war and making a vow before the war. If you give me success, I will dedicate. Now, in the case of chapter 21, it doesn't say that came upon Israel the Spirit of God. So one might say, there's no guarantee in this case that you're going to win. Yeah?
Yes, I think the problem here is that we understand the Spirit of God as being an attitudinal state of mind.
Right.
Whereas I think that tribal is using the translation as saying, an angel sort of came and did it. An actual physical being as a spirit.
I don't think she's saying it's this physical being, but I think what she's claiming is that when the Spirit of God is upon you, that you know that God is with you. That's the claim that she makes, as opposed to saying the Spirit of God came upon you means that
you're very good at it.
Well, you're good, or that it means that God is going to help you, but not necessarily that the person knows, or that it's sort of it's a sort of incentive to fight. It's sort of a Spirit of God is impelling you to do something. But the idea that victory is guaranteed because of that's the claim she makes. And I wonder about that. She claims that the vow itself is problematic. Forget about the nature of the vow. She claims that taking a vow is problematic. And there, I don't know, but my instincts tell me that's not right. But again, this is not the same case, because over here, there's no guarantee. They're attacked, and they say, if in fact you will give me victory, I will. Now, and here they're taking sort of the initiative, as I mentioned last week, because in the previous story of Carmel, which is chapter 14, there Moshe says, don't fight, because God is not with you, because there's no ark, and God's not going to go with you. And they fight anyway, and they lose in Carmel. And over here, I think the point is that the vow itself is a way of saying we don't need an ark, we don't need Moshe. We can have God come with us by our taking a vow, by our taking responsibility. So the vow itself is a way over here of sort of bringing God onto your side. You're taking the risks, but you're hoping that if you do the right thing, that God will be with you. So that's the story over here. Yeah?
Is that avodah zarah? To say, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to do this thing, and if you say yes, then it's okay, and if you don't say yes, it's not okay. In other words, it's CNN and all this nonsense. I mean, if God is with you, this is why I'm thinking that tribal might have something underneath the surface, because I'm troubled by the existence of it also. It strikes me in some instinctual level as idolatrous to say, if this, then this, if that, then this, and if not this, then it won't. If the Spirit of God is on you, whatever that means, okay? And that's not a faithless or a trivial statement. I mean, the Spirit of God, you can't even imagine. It must be or could be something huge. And if you possess that and know that, then I agree hands down with trivial that having to make a nader, which is almost idolatrous, it strikes me in this context, the if-then clause, the whole thing, it just doesn't smack right. I didn't like it when Jacob did it.
Well, we'll get to Jacob in 1 second.
But I didn't like it when Jacob did it either, when he says, but if you do this, then I'll do this, and this is a on the land. So I mean, the whole thing.
You may not like it. The question is, does the Chumash like it or not? That's the question.
Correct. But you were saying,
we'll see that in a minute.
Tells you this.
I don't see it that way. I don't think that the neder per se is problematic. I think the neder is a way of saying we're going to enter into war. We're entering into war, fighting your battles, basically. In other words, they're suggesting that the war is God's war. After all, it's a war against the Canaanites, and God has declared war against the Canaanites. It's also a defensive struggle. Israel doesn't start the war. It's a way of saying, it is a way of getting God on your side, but I don't think it's just because there's no benefit to them over here. They don't gain from the war. They just destroy the enemy. They're not taking anything. They're chayrim. They take nothing. It's a way of saying that we see this war as fighting in consonance with God.
But then
And we
why
don't
did he
need...
have to say it?
What?
Why did he have to express it?
Why did who have
in
to
that
say
way?
it?
Why does Israel in Bamidbar, why does Yiftach in the present time, that in the chapter we're talking about, why did he have to express it in an if-then possibility?
That's how it's expressed. It says, but why do you need an ark to go with you into battle, right? In the first instance. Don't go into battle, and the ark doesn't go.
Yeah, but that's all told to them beforehand. I think the issue is the temporal issue. I think if he knows he's going to win, he doesn't need to make this vow. He doesn't know he's going to win.
I don't believe he knows.
I
The
don't
fact that
think
it
he
says
knows.
that God's Spirit came upon him...
Doesn't
I
mean
think-
that he knows it's
I
going to
don't
be a
think it-
victory.
I don't think it means that at all. I think it means that the Spirit of God came upon him does not suggest necessarily, we think it means that, but what he actually knows,
It's different.
who knows what he actually knows? Since you mentioned the Jacob vow, that is, I think, irrelevant. What?
Jacob is guaranteed that
Right,
God
God
will
tells
protect
him
him, and he still takes.
I'm getting it, exactly, but, right.
doesn't
Well, wait,
say
plus-
will be.
we'll get to Jacob, exactly.
Yeah.
That Jacob is a good example, yeah.
Back to the very beginning, when Sarah is criticized for not believing the angels when they say to Abraham that she's going to have a baby, she's criticized for that. Now you can
Right.
say the Spirit of God was upon her or upon the whole situation. How does one know if there's any spirit upon God? God's not going to think, I'm on your side. Sometimes, but usually not.
Well, there it doesn't suggest that the Spirit of God is upon her altogether.
Well, the physical angel-
She overhears the angels talking, right.
Right, but...
She has doubts about what the angels are saying.
Representatives?
Well, she has doubts. No, but she does have doubts, and she is criticized. I mean, that's
I don't
true.
blame her for having doubts. She's 90-something years old.
Right? That's what the angels say. Is anything too difficult for God? Right. It's not physical. It's not scientifically possible for her to have a child. That's true. Yeah. Yes. What?
I've heard that episode with Sarah laughing. I've heard explained as really a rebuke to Abraham. You mean you didn't tell your wife you were going to...
That is true. He also laughs himself, right? No, it is indirectly. It's certainly a rebuke to Abraham as well. But it's a question of why is she singled out and not Abraham? When Abraham laughs, God does criticize, but not in the same way. Okay, that's a different question. That's coming up in the parsha in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, what do you want to say back there?
About Yiftach adopting a Moabite practice.
Yes.
Chazal are very big that Mesha Melech Moab, in his sacrificing his son,
Yes.
got counsel from his counsel to adopt the Israelite strategy of letting go of your firstborn.
Okay. Right. That's true. That's true. Okay. Well, the Akedah is always around. Maybe we'll touch upon the Akedah.
So what I mean is,
Right.
that's not a one-way street. That keeps circling.
Okay, it's possible. That is possible. But our concern here is Yiftach. Well, we take a look at Yaakov's vow. So Yaakov's vow, as Herb says, took the words out of my mouth. In the case of Yaakov, which is on page 56, so there Yaakov is leaving home, or running away from home, and he goes to sleep. He goes to sleep in a place, he doesn't realize where he's sleeping. It's a very special place. And when he goes to sleep there, he has a dream. In the dream, there's this staircase or ladder going up to heaven. Angels going up and down the ladder. It's at page 58, chapter 28, verses number 10, 11, 12. He has a dream. And in the dream, God speaks to him. God speaks to Yaakov in this dream. And God says to Yaakov, Ani Hashem Elohei Abraham Avicha v'Elohei Yitzchak, I'm the God of Abraham, God of Isaac. The land upon which you are lying will someday be yours. And then God continues, and your descendants will multiply like the dust of the earth, east, north, west, south, whatever, all directions. And then in verse 15, V'nei Anochi imach. And behold, says God, I am with you. Ushmarticha b'chol asher telech. And I will protect you wherever you go. Vashivoticha el ha'adamah azot, and I will bring you back. So I'm going to be with you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to bring you back. Ki lo e'ezavcha, I'm not going to abandon you. Ad asher I'm going to do everything that I say I'm going to do. I'm not going to leave you. I'll be with you. I will guard you, and I will bring you home. And yet Jacob wakes up from this dream. And when he wakes up from the dream, okay, he says, I didn't realize that God was in this place. Anochi lo yadati, what an awesome place. Certainly this is the house of God. It means above. Where I'm sleeping, above me, must be God's house. The angels going up and down the staircase. Must be God's temple up there in heaven. And then we have, and Jacob gets up in the morning, takes this rock, and he puts it up as a pillar, pours oil upon it, names the place Beit El, the house of God. And then, on the top of page 57, Vayidar Yaakov neder leimar, and Jacob took a vow. Im yeh Elohim imodi, if God be with me, ushmarani baderech hazeh asher anochi olech, and guard me on the path that I am going. V'notan li lechem le'echol u'beged lubosh, it gives me food to eat and clothing to wear. V'shavti b'shalom b'beit avi, and brings me back in peace to my father's house. V'ayah Hashem li Elohim, God will be for me a God. And this rock that I set up shall become the house of God. And everything I have I will tithe. So here you have a vow. What's very strange about the vow is he simply repeats what God said. He repeats, God said, I will be with you, I will guard you, and I will bring you home. And then Jacob takes a vow. If in fact, right, you are with me. Right? That's how he starts. If in fact God is with me, and God is protecting me. And then he adds, gives me food and clothing. Maybe that's part of the protection. And brings me back in peace to my father's house. If you do all of those things, that's a neder, it's conditional. If, then you'll be my God. And not only that, I will build God's house. So here you have actually, it's interesting, here you have, what does this mean? Here it's simply repeating what God said.
Maybe it's the bilateral nature of the agreement. Maybe it's not even just a simple vow. Maybe it's a haskama. He's agreeing to it. One was in his imagination or spirit or unexpressed, and the other is expressed and like a consummation of it.
Right. It's presented as a conditional, right?
But he doesn't have Ruach Hashem.
What?
He doesn't have Ruach Hashem. He thinks it's a dream. And it's a nice dream, so hey.
No, I don't think that's the case. No, God is speaking to him in the dream. I would say the opposite.
He doesn't understand that God's speaking to him.
How does he know that God is? He says, "Hello, Yadati."
No, he says it. No, he says, I didn't know it's God's house. He knows that. He knows God is above. The angels, God's messages go through the world. He knows it totally. So it means something. Yeah.
I have a feeling
Yeah.
like the letter is when this is material.
Could be that im doesn't mean if. You're saying im. Now im is often used when it comes to vows and oaths. Im is often a word that is used. It sounds like a conditional. You could say when, but the fact of the matter is he formulates it in conditional terms. And the fact is that virtually every neder of the Bible is that way. Now, the question is there something problematic about what Jacob says or not? If you do this, give me clothing, you'll be my God. And if you don't do it, you won't be my God. That is a way to read it. But I don't think it's the best way to read it. I don't think that's what he's saying, actually. He's saying something different. He's saying the following. He's saying, I'm leaving home now. I thought I was leaving for a couple of weeks to visit my uncle. Now I discover that I need your protection. So it's a dangerous journey, etc. You're going to protect me and guard me. Why do I need protection? I don't know, but something is dangerous here. But he's saying something different. He's saying that if you do all these things for me, then Vayah Hashem li Elohim, I don't think he means to say then I'll believe in God. And if you don't give me clothing to wear, I won't believe in God. He's saying something different. He's saying that Vayah Hashem li Elohim, that I know you're the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, that I know. But the question is, are you the God of Jacob? By that he means, I'm different than Abraham and Isaac. I am the child of Isaac and Abraham. That's true. But if you give me the opportunity, I will do something that no one else has ever done before. And what no one else has ever done before, in Jacob's language, is Beit Elohim. No one has ever built the house of God. That is to say, no one has built a structure in which every member of the family is actually included. Because Abraham only has one covenantal child, and Isaac has one covenantal child. So I promised to come back and to build Beit Elohim, to build God's house on earth, God's house in heaven that I've seen. It's modeled on God's house in heaven, but I'm going to build Beit Elohim on earth, provided that you give me the opportunity. The opportunity means I have to come back, and actually I find this extremely interesting, something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, about the nature of our prayers. And that is that it strikes me that what Jacob says over here is actually very reminiscent of our Shmona Esrei, of our Amidah. Because basically, the point is, start off by saying the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm standing before the God of Abraham, Gadol Gibor V'Norah, and I'm committing myself to God. But then the question is, and I'm going to build God's house. Even the third blessing, Norah, is Jacob. Jacob sees the angels. Man Norah Makom Hazeh. But then the question is, how do you make the dream reality? And what Jacob is saying, in order to make the dream reality, I need you to be with me. I need you to protect me, food and clothing. And then I need to return not just to my father's house, but V'shavti b'shalom el Beit David. So if you think about our Shmona Esrei, about the requests that we make, most of them have to do with God's protection, sustenance, Birkat HaShanim, good health. And the second half of them refer to, I would say, V'shavti b'shalom el Beit David. It's about creating a society which is equitable and safe. And that's fundamentally our Shmona Esrei. So the point is, what Jacob is saying, I think, is he's taking a vow in the sense, it is conditional. If you give me the opportunity to serve you, I'm going to serve you. And what's interesting is, and this is an important point about vows in the Bible, the Talmud has a whole tractate called Masechet Nedarim. The Talmud actually invents something that is certainly not the pshat. See, the Talmud thinks a neder. In the Talmud, there are two kinds of vows. There's a vow that you promise to give something to God, like a sacrifice. And there's another kind of vow where you forbid something on yourself. That's the Talmud's understanding of a neder. The Rashbam already noted that the second one doesn't seem to be the pshat in any place in the Torah. The neder in the Chumash is clearly something you donate to God, whether it's a sacrifice. In this case, it's actually a building. It's actually building the house of God. Or the Nazarite dedicates himself or herself to God. It's something that's being dedicated. So what Jacob is taking a neder over here, the neder is always a sacrifice. And he says, if you give me the opportunity, bring me back in peace, take care of me, as you said you would. But if you do all those things, when you bring me back in peace, in gratitude for that, I will promise, I promise now, a neder, to build the house. So there's certainly nothing in these nedarim, not in the vow of Jacob, not in the vow of Chana, certainly. Chana is the same thing. If you give me the child that I'm asking for, I will dedicate the child to God. It's very similar to Yiftach, but the difference is that in the case of Yiftach, the dedication to God results in the death of the child. In the case of, not that he intended to do that, I mean, he didn't intend to sacrifice his own child, but basically it's a sacrifice. In the case of Chana, it's a kind of sacrifice. Not that her child will die, but the child will be handed over to God. That's a neder. So the nedarim in general, the neder in chapter 21 of Bamidbar, if you give me the opportunity to be victorious, I will dedicate the victory to you. That's the neder. So the point is, now you get to Yiftach, okay? My gut tells me that Tribble's wrong. My gut tells me that Ruach Hashem, that the neder in general is good. Dedicating things to God is good. The problem is, he dedicates the wrong way. If he had said, I'll bring a sacrifice if I win, then that's another story. I mean, even Noah, we read it yesterday, comes out of the ark, And the first thing he does when he comes out of the ark, I presume in gratitude for being delivered, is to bring a sacrifice. So I don't think there's anything, strikes me that the sacrifice is not the problem. The neder is not the problem. It's the nature of the neder. It's the idea of human sacrifice, which is problematic. And I think the Akedah is always lurking. In the Akedah, he is told. He doesn't volunteer it. Abraham didn't volunteer to bring the sacrifice. He's instructed to bring the sacrifice. And the end of the day, he does bring a sacrifice. Doesn't bring his own child, but he brings these proxy. He brings a proxy for the child. So that I want to put out. That's what Tribble suggests. Think about it. There's maybe something to it. My gut tells me it's not right, but it's my gut. Maybe you have a different instinct here. Yeah, what do you want to say, Wendy?
It seems to me that if we change the word from if to when,
Okay.
in terms of neder, that makes the whole thing very clear.
Could be that im in this case means
You know,
when.
that the form of neder is to say, well, when this happens, I will owe you something, and this is what I'll do, because I owe you something.
Right, but in the case of, for example, in the case over here, it when makes a lot of sense, since God has told Jacob in the dream, this is what I plan to do. Now Jacob adds a few details. Not just I come back to my father's house, I come back in peace. Right, that's true. But say the case of Chana. In the case of Chana, God made no promises to Chana. Zero.
Completely to talk to him.
Right, so Chana is saying then, she can't say when, she has to say if, because she has no guarantee. There's a when. If you do this, then I will in fact dedicate the child to you. What do you want to say here?
In the case of Noah, God takes a nether. God
Right.
says, I will know.
An oath, actually, right, yeah.
Which is the incredible opposite of this.
Right.
God is making a nether.
Right.
I'm never going to bring a flood again to destroy
Right.
man.
Right, that's true. That God is taking a shua basically, but it doesn't matter. It's basically a commitment,
And he does that
a holy
only after the
commitment.
sacrifice, after he
Right.
smells the
Right.
sweet savor of the sacrifice. Then
Right.
he takes a nether.
Right, that's true. That is true. Okay, so yes.
Do you have any idea about the whole notion of sacrifice? What is it?
What is sacrifice?
Yeah.
I think sacrifice is the idea that we are in God's hands and we have to serve God. The fact is, the Chumash does not justify human sacrifice. It's clear. The Chumash forbids it. Not only sacrifice to foreign deities, the Chumash seems to forbid using these methods to serve God as well. The Chumash doesn't say you can't pass the children through the fire to Molech. It does say that, but elsewhere it says you shouldn't pass the children through the fire, period. So the Chumash forbids it. Having said that, the Chumash does forbid it, but the Chumash never makes the claim, I think, that God doesn't have the right to demand it. The fact of the matter is, God told Abraham to do it, and I don't believe, by the way, that when you read the story of the Akedah that we'll get to in a couple of weeks, that there's the slightest intimation that God has no right to do it. I don't believe that's true. You read the Akedah, God has every right to do it, especially in the case of Isaac, since God is actually the father. Because there's no way, it's a miraculous birth, which not only miraculous in terms of Sarah, but it strikes me that the Chumash suggests, I didn't mean that God is the biological father, but the Chumash is suggesting that God is the father. It's very striking, by the way, in that particular case, in the Akedah, that whereas the Chumash talks about Avram and Hagar, and Abraham went in unto Hagar, it never says that with Sarah. It says Sarah gave birth to Abraham's child. It never describes how that happened. So it strikes me that the birth of Yitzchak, actually Sarah said it. Vatomer Sarah, Tzachok Soli Elohim. Now, tzachok is a sexual term in the Bible. God has tzachok Soli Elohim, intimates actually that exactly. The Christians read it that way, and there's something to it, by the way. I mean, in terms of the pshat, no doubt. Tzachok Soli Elohim, so it sits as God's child, and even if it weren't God's child, we're all God's children. The Chumash never suggests that God doesn't have the right to to call upon anybody to take someone as a sacrifice. The Chumash never suggests that. What the Chumash suggests is, as it says in Jeremiah, this is not my way. I never even dreamt of that. But the point is, not that God doesn't have the right to do it, but God doesn't do it. But the idea that the human being is God's creature, and that God has every right to recall the human at any point in time, that lies at the core of sacrifice, in my view.
But do you have a sense what makes slaughtering an animal a kind of working of God?
Because it's the closest thing to a human. The Ramban says, it's not an animal. It's the animal that's closest to the human. It's only the domesticated animals. And maybe we don't have that sense, you know what I mean? But if you grow up on a farm or something like that, with the animals, it's a very different kind of relationship. So, without getting into the details of all this right now, the Akedah on one hand says God doesn't want human sacrifice, not at all. But God, even in the Akedah, the way Abraham gets out of sacrificing Isaac is by finding a proxy for Isaac. It's not just the various piyutim that are written about the Akedah, and there are many of them. Talks about Tamura. There are many piyutim about the Akedah. That itself could be a whole class, by the way, because the Akedah figures in many ways in our prayers, especially in the Slichot service. The Slichot, at least of the Ashkenazim, there's a genre called Akedah. And the Akedah is a particular form of the Slicha, and there are many Akedos that are written. Each one picks up on a different piece of the Akedah. It's extremely interesting. So, one of them about Kedusha, Havayat Tzmurato Yekodesh. That in the case over here, the substitute for Yitzchak is acceptable. Even though normally Tzmura is not acceptable, but in this particular case it's acceptable. And the idea that, in a certain, I would say, psychological sense, that Isaac was actually sacrificed. There are midrashim that claim he was sacrificed and resurrected. Leave that out. But if you forget that, in a psychological sense, that he was sacrificed, is central to our prayers, because in these three prayers, blessings that we have in the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, Gadol, Gibor, V'Norah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the second blessing is about resurrection. And it's clearly related to Isaac. The composers of the prayer describe Tchiyat HaMeitim in a variety of ways that are very interesting. But the Shunamis, yes, the resurrection. You have it twice, by the way. You have it twice with both with Eliyahu and Elisha. And you're right. And the Haftorah takes all the language from the Akedah, by the way. It's replete with language from the Akedah. So in terms of sacrifice, human sacrifice, the Bible opposes it, without question. Tremendously opposes it. It's something we can never engage in. But the concept that God has the right to it, no, that's true. God has the right to do it. It's God's world. So we are in God's service, whatever God chooses that service to be. God doesn't want us to engage in human sacrifice. That's as much as I can say now about the Akedah. But the Akedah, anyways, in the case of the Akedah, it's God that instructs Abraham. And by the way, Abraham never complains. Abraham never says, how can you do this? This is murder. No, it's not murder. Sacrifice is not murder. He never says a word. And there's not a sense in that story, although the moderns were bothered by it, and it is troubling. But there's absolutely no sense whatsoever in the Akedah that Abraham has a complaint, you can't demand that of me, nor is there any sense in the Akedah that Abraham did anything less than the perfect fulfillment of God's word. That's for sure. And everything to the contrary, you can discount it. Sometimes there are many different possibilities, but anything to the contrary of what I just said, namely, that there's absolutely no intimation in the story that Abraham thinks God doesn't have the right, and B, that it's nothing less than a perfect fulfillment of God's command. That's obvious from the language. Anything to the contrary, you can discount it. That's just absolutely not right. It's just off base. Okay, I got to move on. Go ahead, Sarah.
So it's always domesticated anyway?
Yes, of course. Yes.
You had said once, pretty recently, that God uses the Jewish people to fight his war. Would you put that in the category of a right of offering?
I didn't say God always uses the Jewish people. There are texts where God is using the Jews to fight God's war, like Amalek, for example, stuff like that. But my point is not to make global statements about God here. I'm just saying that in terms of the Yiftach story, okay, I did think that what Tribble suggests is very interesting, even though I don't think it's right. But I just wanted to put out there and to say something about the neder. Her point that the neder is off, that strikes me as not right. I think the kind of neder is off. I don't think nedarim are ever off. I think nedarim are actually positive things. There's a danger that you won't fulfill the neder. That's another story. The Torah says, Kohelet says, don't take vows because you might not fulfill the vow. So don't do that. But I don't believe you'll find a vow that the Bible thinks is a negative. Okay, let me just move on here with this. Okay, but that's fine. Now let's continue. So this is Yiftach here, and now I wanted to say something about Yiftach's daughter. Tragic story, no doubt. And that, so the end of the day, here once again we come to apologetics, but our task is just to see what the Torah actually says. So the Torah seems to say that Yiftach actually sacrifices his daughter. That's found, and the daughter doesn't complain, by the way. The daughter says, you opened your mouth, maybe you shouldn't have, but what can you do? You have to do what you vowed. And the language actually, back to page 545, is Kasher yotzami picha, aseli kasher yotzami picha, in verse 636 on page 545, is exactly the language of the Torah. Someone who takes a vow, kachol hayotzei mipiv yaseh. That's exactly the language of the Chumash. So she's saying, she doesn't know from Hataras Nadarim. She says, look, you took a vow, you shouldn't have done it, but there's no option over here. You have to fulfill the vow. Now, whether that is true or not, I question that. Whether there would not be a way out of it. We know in the case of Saul that he took a vow to kill his son, or to kill whoever ate of the spoils, or ate of food that day, didn't fast, but the people saved Jonathan. So somebody might have stepped in and said, this is not right? Although the reason they give over there is that Jonathan brought about the victory. But could somebody have stepped in? The rabbinic tradition is that somebody should have stepped in. And they fault others for not stepping in. It's a whole discussion. That's a question. But in any event, so she says to him, doesn't you have no right to do it? That she doesn't say. She says, do what you committed yourself to. But then she asks a favor. Vatomer el Aviyah. So this is on page verse 37, 545. Yaseh li adavar hazeh harpei mimeni shnayim chadoshim v'yelcha v'yoradati al heharim v'yevkel b'tulai anochi v'rayotai. So she's like, give me 2 months to go to the mountains. The Hebrew is very interesting. V'yoradati al heharim. The red that usually means to go down. But v'yoradati al heharim doesn't mean to go down the mountains, presumably. It means to traverse the mountains. I guess when you go to the mountains, you're walking up, you're walking down, etc. Let me go to the mountains, let me walk in the mountains. It means let me be alone with my friends to mourn my state, she says. Let me go to mourn my state. Give me 2 months. So he says to his daughter, Lechi. He says, go. So she goes for 2 months. And she cries about her situation, right? Her maidenhood, she cries in the mountains. And he did the vow that he had made. It strikes me that the writer is bothered by this, that the language doesn't want to say he sacrificed her. Not because he didn't sacrifice her, but because the matter is so distasteful. So he puts it in very, he doesn't want to say explicitly. But Vayas Nidro Asher Nodar, I think it all be understood one way. He did the vow that he made. He said, I'm going to bring a sacrifice to God. I'll bring an offering to God. That's what he said, right? V'avitiu olo, be a burnt offering. So like, same as Isaac, right? Haleu Shabli Allah. Exactly. So, and now we have the following. Verse number 40, which I think is very interesting for our study of these stories. It says, Biyamim Yamima. Teilachna B'not Yisrael L'tanot L'bat Yiftach HaGiladi Arbat Yamim Bashana. Biyamim Yamima. From time to time, it's periodically, the daughters of Israel go to bewail the fate of Yiftach's daughter 4 days in the year. So what struck me interesting is the expression Biyamim Yamima.
I thought it's from time in.
I don't think so. I think Biyamim, I'll show you. That Biyamim Yamima,
Is year to year.
right. Biyamim Yamima is a very important term, and it comes up in this book, and it comes up in the chapter after this book. It comes up in this book. First, it comes up in the Chumash. Referring to the Paschal sacrifice. Means you shall do this every year, at a periodic time. That's Biyamim Yamima. And the phrase Biyamim Yamima comes up first over here in chapter 11, and then it comes up in the last chapter of the book. The last chapter of the book is part of the story of the concubine of Gibeah that we'll get to hopefully in a few weeks, three weeks or so. The story over there, as we know, is that a man is married to his wife, or she's also called a concubine. She runs away from him. He runs after her, he brings her back, and they stop off in a town in Gibeah, where she is assaulted, raped, and actually murdered. After which he cuts up her body and sends it throughout all of Israel, and he says, look what happened to my wife, terrible thing, what are we going to do about it? And there's a civil war. All the tribes against Binyamin. That's Gibeah, Binyamin. At the end of the last chapter of the book, so it turns out that Binyamin is almost completely eliminated, annihilated. And the tribes have misgivings. A tribe will be lost in Israel. But in addition, each one took a vow. Here we have the vow again. They took a vow not to permit their daughters to marry Benjamin. This is actually interesting in our context. And then after they take the vow, they feel bad. Because this tribe is going to be eliminated, because the women of Benjamin have all been killed. So there are no women. So what are we going to do? So first they have one solution, partial solution. They found one group of people that didn't take the vow. So they kill them. They take all the women and they hand them over to Benjamin. Problem is, not enough women. Need more women. So the last chapter of the book, they don't know what to do. They can't figure it out themselves. So they go to the Zakanim, to the Torah sages, to the council. Need advice. What do you do in this case? So here's the advice. The advice is, I'll put it in my own terms, my own language, but it's in the last chapter. You took a vow not to give your daughters to Benjamin. Okay, you can't give your daughters to Benjamin. But here's what you should do. In Shiloh, which is the central temple, there's a periodic festival during which the women go out during this festival, during this Chag, it's called the Chag, and they dance in the vineyards. So when the women go to dance in the vineyards in Shiloh, what you got to do is, before they dance in the vineyards, you have to hide in the vineyards. And when you see them dancing in the vineyards, you just grab one, kidnap one, and take her home. Right. And that's what they do. That's what they do. It's 7, 8 verses from the end of the book, and the last verses, in those days there was no king. Everybody did whatever they want. The solution to the terrible situation created by the violation of one woman, the solution is to violate thousands. That's how the book ends, actually.
So what is Biyamim Yamima?
What is Biyamim Yamima? Where's the verse?
Verse 19.
I tell you something, I knew it was there before I even saw this. It's got to be there. How about chapter 20, was it chapter 21, last chapter?
Yeah.
Verse number 19. Vayomru, Hidei Chag Hashem b'Shilo miyamim yamima. Now, there are 2 yamim yamimas in the book. They both involve women. The first is the very unfortunate killing of an innocent young woman, that's Yiftach's daughter, due to his, not to his malice, but to his stupidity, I would say, and his connection to the idolatrous practices of the people that he's fighting. The second instance, Biyamim Yamima, which takes place, and none other than Shiloh, which is the temple, basically. There is the kidnapping of the women in Shiloh, which takes place in Yabib Yabiba. And what is in particular interesting over here, and I'll get back to the several things that are interesting. Let me make a simple point. This is the last chapter of the book, 8 verses before the end of the book. What's the next chapter? Next chapter is Shmuel. The greatest, right? First chapter of Shmuel. So is the story of Hannah. She's married to Elkanah. How does it begin? Verse number 3. V'yulah isha hu me'iro miyabim yabiba l'ishtachavot v'lizbach l'Hashem tzvot b'Shiloh. So he goes up miyabim yabiba to Shiloh. Shiloh is the place where the kidnapping takes place. And we discover very soon it's a place of utter corruption. So the point is, there are 3 Yamim Yamimas. Actually, there's a 4th one too. Later, with chapter 2 with Hannah. She would go periodically to bring her son a coat, Miyabim Yabiba. So there are 4 Yamim Yamimas. The first 2 in Judges, the second 2 with Hannah. And the point about the Hannah story is, whereas a husband goes up Miyabim Yamima to bow down and sacrifice, Hannah has no interest in that on any level. She doesn't even eat the sacrifices. She's too miserable to eat them. But she goes to Shiloh with her husband, and then when she goes to Shiloh, finally, she prays in Shiloh. Now, what is very interesting, I think, in terms of the question we had raised, just struck me, that the question we raised about Yiftach, which the Talmud raises, is, why did Yiftach fulfill the vow? Wouldn't there be a way around it? Okay, it's true, as the Mishnah says, the Bible doesn't seem to know from what we call Hatarat Nedarim is not in the Bible. As the Mishnah says, it floats in the air, has no basis. Okay. But sometimes there are other ways to get out of things besides Hatarat Nedarim. I'll give an example. Where we have an example of people getting, we gave the example of Saul. The other people said to Saul, you can't kill Jonathan. He brought the victory. But we see even in this book another way to get out of a vow. The last story. Everybody took a vow. I'm not going to let my daughter marry Benjamin. So the Zakanim, I'm not saying it, I mean it's all perverse, but the Zakanim have a way out of it. You can't give your daughters to Benjamin. But if they kidnap them, you didn't give them. That's the way out of the vow, right? You can't give them. You took a vow not to hand your daughter to Benjamin. Okay. So let's inform the Benjaminites that the young women are dancing in the vineyards and they should hide there. And when you see them dancing, just kidnap them. And then later people will say, I thought you couldn't give my, your children will say, what's going on here? You took a vow not to give to Benjamin. We didn't give him to Benjamin. They grabbed him. That's a way out, okay? Now, the point is, perverse or not, it speaks to the point that there are typically ways to get out of commitments. I'm sure we can think of many ways, actually. And the fact of the matter is, given that last story, as perverse as it may be, one could only wonder whether there might, as the rabbinic tradition says, there should have been a way to get out of this vow, but no one took advantage, or no one's thinking about it, including his daughter. She accepted, right? Do what you got to do, you know. So I'm just wondering whether the Yamimas of the 2 stories, actually, both which point to the abuse, in this case, the abuse of women, which is actually very important because the point of the king has 2 functions. One is to fight wars, but the other is to do justice, mishpat and tzedakah. And justice means protecting the most vulnerable people in society. And typically, women usually are among the more vulnerable. So the fact that the book of Judges is speaking to the failure for whatever reason, to protect the most vulnerable is generally speaking, a big indictment of this whole period we call Judges, and it necessitates a different model of leadership, which is the story of Hannah. Hannah prays for a king. Now the king is not perfect either, as we know. But so the Yamimas actually are very interesting. What do you want to say?
I mean, it's kind of a reflexive to the Akeda. In other words, Isaac was challenged. In other words, would he follow the covenant? And he
Isaac or Abraham?
Abraham, I'm sorry.
Abraham.
And
right, the body of Isaac is nothing to do with Isaac, by the way. Right.
But at this point in time, it's so chaotic that, in a way, he had to fulfill this vow. There was no way out.
Well, there's always a way out, you know?
But yeah, that's, you know, but in other words, otherwise, how would the tide change?
Right, but my point is,
Why would?
things change when people stand up and take positions. That's when things change. If people don't take positions, as she says, I'm not blaming her. You open your mouth, you got to do what you got to do. So the solution would have been somebody saying, as the people said later on, one second, this makes no sense actually. Someone who's coming to celebrate God's victory. That's where she's coming. She's coming to celebrate God's victory is the one you hand over to as a sacrifice. That's crazy. That's what someone could have said. That's what the Talmud says. The Talmud actually, it's interesting, whom does the Talmud blame? You know what the Talmud blames? Pinchas. And where is Pinchas found in the book of Judges? He's in Shiloh, actually. They're probably picking up on this. Pinchas is the priest of Shiloh. So the point is they blame him. Now, is this the pshat? From one perspective, it's not the pshat, but from a different perspective, I think it is the pshat, that there's something not right here. There's a failure of leadership, it's not just Yiftach. Remember, Yiftach is the best of the bunch. They go to Yiftach to save them. So the point is, there's a failure of leadership in general. There's no real leadership. Were there leadership, or even a bunch of people with common sense, they would have said, this can't be. It's just not right. So therefore, we have to find a different way. Maybe find a proxy. Maybe there's a ram entangled in the brook. That kind of thing. But that's the rabbinic view of this, and I think there's a lot to be said for it, even in terms of the pshat. Okay, let us, Sarah, what do you want to say?
I think we skipped something here. Because it said, "Vehi lo yada ish
Yes.
to lie."
Right. True.
So there is something
Right.
there.
There is a view, actually, that he doesn't actually kill her, but that she doesn't get married. But the difficulty with that, I think, I saw recently, I was just curious, I said, so Chabad talks about everything, you know? She wasn't really killed, she dedicated her life to God. I have to ask myself, if you dedicated your life to God, why would we mourn you 4 times a year? What? That's nuts, actually, you know? Poor Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's mourn Moshe.
She doesn't have children.
What?
She doesn't have children.
She has no children, that's right. So the point is, there's something else over here. The point of the judges, this is relevant to the book. The difference in a king and a judge is that a king is actually dynastic. The idea of kingship, the reason people want a king, right? These classes are called before there was a king. People want a king. Basically, one of the reasons they want a king, maybe the main reason, is that what a king affords you is a kind of stability. If you're going to have a different system, let's say a judge, the judge's children don't follow the judge. The only judge whose child tries to follow his path is Gidon Avimelech, who's a murderous guy who calls himself a king. But a normal judge is the one upon whom the Spirit of God comes, right? As over here. He's chosen for a particular task, and then he goes back to his normal life. After the destruction of Shiloh and the priesthood is destroyed as a political force, whereas the leading political force, so the prophet takes over. Samuel, for one chapter, is the leader. Chapter 7 of Samuel, he's the leader. And the people go to Samuel in chapter 8 and they say, you're old, we need a king. So Samuel has his sons who are corrupt, doesn't realize it. But the point of it, they only go to Samuel when he's old. Samuel's young, no one asks for a king. They ask for a king, they say, you're old and your sons are no good. Give us a king. Now, of course, you could ask the question, let's say you get a king. What guarantee is there that the sons of the king are going to be good? We have many kings whose sons were not good. But the point of the people is something else, which is, if the leader is a prophet, a person of God, if your leader is a spiritual person, then every generation there's a new job search, because we don't know of prophets whose children are prophets. This we don't have in our Bible. Not in the pshat of the Bible in any event. We have disciples on occasion. We don't have, it's not hereditary. Kingship is hereditary. So the point is that if you have a prophet as your leader, there's no guarantee, there's a guarantee this child won't be the next leader, so every generation is a new job search. You got to find a true spiritual person. There are no, in other words, there are no bad prophets. There are false prophets. But a false prophet is not a prophet. But there are plenty of bad kings, actually. So the point is, if you have kingship as the model, you can have kings for we had kings for hundreds of years. Were they all good? Hardly. But they're kings. And it's marked, for example, by the fact that the king has certain clothing, a uniform. The prophet has no uniform. Because the prophet's not about the externals. The prophet is about, what?
But we have priesthood, which is...
Priesthood is parallel to kingship. Priesthood was the leading force in Israel at the beginning of Shmuel. Priesthood's the same way. It's not about the person. It's about the job. It's about the uniform. Big Day Kahuna, Big Day Malchut, which is probably based on Big Day Kahuna, or whatever. So the point is, people want stability. And they want dynasty. And the book of Judges is about not having, what happens when you don't have stability. So Gideon Gideon has one son who's no good, and he kills all his brothers. Avimelech, that doesn't work. Yiftach has no successor. If his daughter had lived, okay, maybe she marries somebody, and that person becomes the next king, the son-in-law. David was Saul's son-in-law, right? So maybe but that doesn't happen. So one of the themes of the book is the lack of stability. Okay, let's continue now with, what time is it first of all? 11? 11, okay, fine. Okay, plenty of time. So let's continue with our friend Yiftach over here. This is the first story, Yiftach's daughter, tragic story. And now we have the next story, which is also very interesting about Yiftach. And then next week we will start with Shimshon. Let's just finish up with Yiftach here. This is next chapter. Was it chapter 12? Is it 13? 12. Okay. Vayitzaek ish Ephraim, vayavod safoda. Page 546. Vayavod safoda. Vayamru Yiftach, madua avarta lilachem b'vnei Amon. Ulanu lo karata l'alecha dimach. Beitcha nisrof alecha ba'esh. So Yiftach has brought about great victory, but he's from Gilad. Now Gilad is on the other side of the Yarden, and we know from the Chumash it sounds like it was given to Menashe. The people of Ephraim complain. This is after the victory is over. The war's over, so it's over. Now Ephraim comes along. How come you fought against Ammon? Why did you invite us to fight? Right? Beitcha, that's a terrible thing. We're going to burn down your house. Beitcha nisrof alecha ba'esh. So they're talking to a guy, first of all, who just brought about a great victory, and two, just lost his daughter. This is the guy they're talking to. Anyway, now Beitcha nisrof alecha ba'esh, that expression appears elsewhere in the book of Judges. Actually, those words appear elsewhere in the book of Judges. Anybody know where? It appears with the next major judge was Shimshon. In the story of Shimshon in chapter 14, where he where's this over here? Let me see if I can find this. Yes, here it is. This is when Shimshon marries the woman of Timnah. We'll get to these stories; they're very interesting. And then he has a wedding party, like a Sheva Brachos, And at the Sheva Brachos, he poses a riddle. If you can figure out my riddle, there are 30 guests at the wedding party. If you can figure out my riddle, I'll give each one of you a suit. And if you can't figure out the riddle, you have to give me a suit. So the last day of the Sheva Brachos, and they can't figure it out, so they pressure his wife. They want his wife to tell the riddle. And they threaten the wife. It's on page 550. Vayom HaShvi'i, Vayamu Eshet Shimshon, Pati et Ishech. Seduce or coax your husband. V'yaged lanu ata achida. And he'll tell us the answer to the riddle. Pen nisrov otach v'yed beita avicha ba'esh. It's funny, lest we burn you and your father burn you in fire. By the way, these were the friends they invited to the party. Party of Chadasha. This is their friends. Anyway, okay. So, right. After all, what? Did you invite us to make us poor? We're going to lose our coat? What is this, right? So anyway, Beitcha nisrof ba'esh, that's what you have the Philistines saying. in chapter 14, and that's what you have the tribe of Ephraim saying to Yiftach in chapter 12. In fact, it doesn't sound like, and what is he supposed to do? The war's over. So what is he supposed to say to them, basically? In other words, it's over. He can't call them now to the war. Now, here's the interesting. This story is a repeat story. We had this earlier. Earlier, we had the story with Gideon. Gideon also is from Menashe. So Gideon, when he fights against Midian, so he crosses, he fights against Midian, and at the end, and he defeats Midian. And the end of the battle, let's find that verse. Let's see where this is. This is, where is this? Hold on. 1 second. Where is this? Where is it? Anybody find this? Let's see. Yeah, I got it. Beginning of chapter 8, page 534. Vayamru elav ish Ephraim, ma davar hazeh asita lanu, liv'tikra lanu, ki alachta le'achem b'Midyan, vayirivu ito b'chazka. How come you didn't, when you went to fight Midian, how come you didn't call us? Now, in the battle against Midian, Ephraim comes in at the end, because they secure the bridges, so the enemy can't pass by the bridges. But how come he didn't invite us at the beginning of the war? Just he called us at the end of the war. That's what they say to Gideon. So Gideon's a better politician. What do you want from me? Kachem, right? Have I done what you did? Well, what are you complaining about? On the contrary, right? Ephraim's gleanings are better than Aviezer's vintage. You were able to help capture the heads of Midian, Orev and Ze'ev. You were central. You were withheld till the end for the strategic moment where you could defeat 2 of the 4 kings of Midian. So what are you complaining about? On the contrary, you was crucial to the victory. So they accept that. Okay. They didn't actually threaten to burn his house down, but they were very vociferous. Right? They argued with him vociferously. It says there. Now we have Yiftach, and Yiftach is not the same politician. Now, on the other hand, in the case of Ephraim, they did something at the end of the battle. Here they didn't do very much, and furthermore they threatened him. So Yiftach says something that is, we don't know what the truth is, but I think we suspect that what Yiftach says is true. What he says is the following: we have no evidence one way or the other. Vayom Yiftach aleihem. Ishri vayiti ani v'yami u'bnei Amon ma'od. We are engaged in a great war, a great struggle. V'ezak etchem, and I cried out to you. V'lo ha'shatem oti b'yadam, and you didn't help me. V'arek yechom oshia, and when I saw you weren't going to assist, weren't going to help. V'yasim nafshi b'kapi, I took my life in my hands. We have that expression in English too. I endangered myself. V'abra b'nei Amon, v'yidneim Hashem b'yadi, and God handed them over to me. Why do you come now to fight against me? This thing is, you're coming out to fight against me, which is not, there's no fight, but when I asked you to fight against them, you didn't show up. So revisionist history. Why didn't we call you? I did call you. You didn't show up. You didn't come. You did nothing. You put me at risk and the people at risk. I did it. I took all the gambles, and now you're complaining. Fine. This is it. So he could have maybe found another way, sweet talk him or something. He's not interested. Not only does he not interested in sweet talking them, he gets his army together. So he conscripts an army. He gathers the people of Gilad, which is where he's from. And he engages in a war with Ephraim. And the people of Gilad smote Ephraim. Now we have a very difficult phrase. Ki amru, Pelitei Ephraim atem, Gilad, betoch Ephraim, betoch Menashe. One of the more difficult verses. Let's see what the JPS does with this. Meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Okay, that's what I figured they're going to say. Okay. You Gileadites, well, probably what they write is true. You Gileadites are nothing but fugitives from Ephraim. Being in Menashe is like being in Ephraim. So what they seem to be suggesting then, they're insulting the Gilad. They're saying, Gilad doesn't really belong only to you, Menashe. Pelite Ephraim atem, the people that are living in Gilad, essentially, are those people that ran away from Ephraim, second-class citizens, those who abandoned Ephraim. Within Gilad, there is Menashe, but together with Menashe, there are the refugees, the fugitives, or the deserters, I would say. So the Ephraim was insulting Menashe. It's not just that there's a feud, there's a hatred here between the two of them. So there's a civil war. And here the important point, I think, is this, that if you think of civil war is a bad thing, no doubt. And in the book of Judges, we already have intimations that there's a tribal society, and some tribes participate in the common good, and some tribes don't participate. We saw this with the Song of Devorah. This tribe shows up, this tribe shows up. Reuven's busy with his flocks. Dan is busy with his boats. So she condemned certain tribes, those that came to the battle. The town of Meroz didn't help us. Yael did help us. Is great divisions, not just the non-Jews and the Jews, between the Jews themselves. But if you think of two tribes, actually, that should work together, the prime example of tribes working together has got to be Menashe and Ephraim, because not only are they brothers from Joseph, and they're the double portion. They have the double portion of Joseph. So each one is a half, actually. Each one represents half of Joseph. But apart from all that, what's important to remember is that when Jacob blesses Menashe and Ephraim, he blesses them collectively. He does switch his hands, but he gives them the same blessing. The blessing of Ephraim and the blessing of Menashe, this is actually a very important point. It's an identical blessing. He doesn't have two different blessings for them. He has one blessing. The only thing he does is he puts the right hand on the head of Ephraim and the left hand on the head of Menashe. Joseph objects to that. That's a separate question. But Menashe and Ephraim are joined at the hip. And that, as I said, they both actually are part of Joseph's portion. So if there's any two tribes that actually are one, it's got to be Menashe and Ephraim. And the fact that in the book of Judges you have two separate stories about the wars, the almost war in the first instance of Menashe and Ephraim, and the actual war in the second instance of Menashe and Ephraim, points to something very deep in this book about the division of the people. And I would say that the idea of the king, because this is all before there was a king, the king actually, the role of the king, the king has two roles in the book of Shmuel. People want a king for two reasons. One is to fight our wars. Because when you have a federal government as opposed to a tribal, it's a much more powerful army, and and everybody defends, everybody in the country defends every piece of the country. So that's one reason you want to have a king. He will fight our wars. But the other reason is he will be our judge. Shvatanu Malkeinu. And the idea of a central authority in judging is the idea that you're going to dispense justice fairly throughout. The king may come from a particular tribe, but the king is the king of everybody. So the book of Judges, I would say, even more than the need for a king to fight our wars. In the book of Judges, it sounds like you need a king, because without a king, you have anarchy, basically. You have civil war, and one of the prime examples there is at least three different situations, apart from the Devorah song, three situations in the book which speak to division of tribes. Menashe and Ephraim twice, we have them. Here's actual war between them. You have it at the end of the book with Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin is virtually eliminated altogether. And the third example is the tribe of Dan. And it's actually, now that I think about it, there's something curious about that too. Because Menashe and Ephraim, that's Joseph. Binyamin is Joseph's brother, Rachel's other child. And Dan, who was Dan? Dan is the first child from Rachel that Rachel has, right? Donatio, so it's all Rachel's side of the family. In other words, which speaks to a different point, which is apart from apart from Menashe and Ephraim not getting along, it goes back to the old division of Rachel and Leah, the two sides of the family. So you have Dan, Binyamin, Menashe, and Ephraim in this book that are singled out as being separate. And Dan, is interesting, is one of the tribes mentioned that doesn't participate in the war, in the collective battle either. So it's very striking. So this is a significant point. Now let's just finish this up over here. So this is the war between Menashe and Ephraim, which Yiftach cannot prevent. Yiftach can't stop it. Gideon found a way. Gideon found a way to get out of the civil war. Yiftach doesn't have that response, that you did participate in the end. And but maybe he would have found a different way. Maybe he didn't have to go to war. He initiates the war. He gathers the troops. And now we have the following. Verse number 5 of chapter 12. Vayukod Gilad et Ma'abrot HaYarden LeEphraim. So Yiftach held the Ma'abrot HaYarden is the places where you cross over. They translate the fords. Ephraim is trying to run back. Gilad's on the other side of the Jordan. So the Ephraimites, Ephraim wants to get back home by crossing back over. So what Yiftach does is he secures the bridges. In the first story of Gideon, it was Ephraim that secured the bridges against Midian, and now it's Gilad securing the bridges against Ephraim. Vaya ki omru plitei Ephraim evora. Now, when the refugees or the ones who are running away from Gilad wanted to cross the bridges, right? It harks back to the statement plitei Ephraim atem. Here they actually are plitei Ephraim. Here Ephraim is trying to get back home. They got to cross the bridge, but the bridge is secured by Gilad. So what would happen? Vayomru lo anshe Gilad Ephratiyata. So they would ask the one, "Are you from Ephraim? Are you from Ephraim?" Vayomru lo. We're not from Ephraim. So they want to survive. They say they're from Ephraim. They're going to be killed. Oh, we're not from Ephraim. No, we're not. We're from Menashe. We're wherever. We're visiting. Who knows where? Zvulun. Who knows? Anyway, Vayomru lo emarna shibolet. So they said, say the word shibolet. Vayomru sibolet. But they couldn't pronounce the shin. Litvaks, right? You know the joke I told you once, right?
Say it again.
It's one of my favorite jokes. When you go to Gemara, the Gemara says, Gemara hypothesizes something. Gemara will say, I don't understand. I would understand X. That makes sense. But Y makes no sense. Because Bishlama means I understand this. Bishlama, that statement is good. But it's always followed by Bishlama X. But, right? So of course, this joke is that the Rebbe was a Litvak. I'm half Litvak, by the way. So the Rebbe was a Litvak. When I was in Yeshiva University, the guy who came around was a friend of my grandfather, actually, Rabbi Zaks. He was a Litvak. He couldn't pronounce the shin. He would say sin all the time. So the joke is like this. The joke is that the Rebbe's, the Litvak, he's teaching them to read the Talmud, So they come to the word, so the kids, here's the Rebbe read. So Bishloma, so the kid reads Bisloma. So the Rebbe stops. Bisloma, I say Bisloma. I can always say Bisloma. But you can say Bisloma. Why do you say Bisloma? So you know who picks this up? The one who I
Mel
often...
Brooks.
Mel Brooks, exactly. The Craw, when he goes to Chinese. The Craw. Not the Craw, the Craw. Right.
Not the claw, the claw.
Right. Yeah. So Brooks picks this up. So Bishloma. So here you have it actually in the Tanakh. So the Ephraim are Litvaks. So they can't say Shibolet. So they say Sibolet. So when they can't say the shin, they realize they're from Ephraim, and they would kill them and throw Vayishchatu El Ma'abrot. They would throw them slaughter them, throw them into the river.
Which way are they going?
They're going west.
No, I mean, are the people
Trying to get out of Gilad.
the trying to get out of Gilad.
Yeah.
Even though the Giladites they live there, they're blocking. They're it's not the people.
Ephraim's trying to cross out of. Ephraim was in Gilad for some reason. They crossed into Gilad.
Yeah.
They're trying to get back out.
Back home.
And so Menashe of Gilad secures the crossings. So they killed. I'm wondering something else about this business about Shibolet and Sibolet. It's a shin and a sin, obviously. But I'm just wondering, actually, whether there's some significance to the words Shibolet and Sibolet. I don't know what Sibolet means, if it means anything, but we know what Shibolet is. Shibolet's a stalk that grows. And what strikes me is that Menashe and Ephraim are both representatives of Joseph. But Joseph's rise to power, actually, came through his interpretation of the dreams. And of course, the dreams, Hinei Sheva Shibolim is the first dream. It's Sheva Shibolim, right? That's the second dream of Joseph, Pharaoh's dreams that Joseph interprets about the Shibolim. So, say Shibolet perhaps carries with it another significance. In other words, you Ephraimites looked down upon Gilad. You plead to Ephraim Atem, you're second-class citizens. No, we're not saying, we are the real Joseph. Say Shibolet. Can you say Shibolet? They can't say Shibolet. They can't pronounce it. So it's not just a matter of the shin and the sin to identify him that way, perhaps, that the very word itself is significant given the fact that these are two different pieces of the Joseph tribe, which is why the great tragedy over here, we need both of them, but they're very divided. The language actually divides them, as it often does. 42,000, it says, died in this struggle. So we have in the case of Yiftach, then looking back at Yiftach, the king has two roles. One is to fight out wars, and the other is to act as judge, to bring harmony to the nation through equity. And unfortunately, even though from an objective standpoint he was very successful, he wins the war, but at the end of the day, the two stories we're left with at the end, and the ends are very important, is the unfortunate death of Yiftach's daughter due to his own stupidity, and maybe worse than stupidity. And secondly, the fact that at the end of the day, having defeated the enemy, he ends up being a central player in a great civil war between two tribes that are actually one tribe. Okay, that's as far as Yiftach is concerned. So what is next? How much time do we have? Do we have a few more minutes? Or
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So now we're going to start. There are four pieces to these sessions. One is Yiftach and then Shimshon. Then we're going to look at the last stories, and then the book of Ruth. We're not going to get to everything. Maybe we'll continue it. But before there was a king. So the next judge is Shimshon. Let me just begin with chapter 13, verse number 1. Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael asot Rabbi Yedei Hashem on page 547. Vayedei Hashem biyad plishtim 40 shana. So again, we have the same theme. Israel continues to do evil. There's the intervening small prophets that we skipped over, but afterwards they continue to do evil, and God hands them over to the enemy. In this case, it's the Philistines, and for 40 years. Now, what you expect next is to cry out to God in some way. That's what's expected, and that's the pattern that we've seen. But interestingly, we don't have that. The very next verse talks about there was a man from Mishpachat Dan, etc. They have no children. The angel of God comes. You're going to have a child. He's going to be the Savior. So what's missing over here is the crying out to God. Now the question is, why is it missing, actually? It is in fact missing. And we could explain it in more than one way. I will mention the following, and we'll pick up with this next week, I hope, which is that in the previous story of Yiftach, back in chapter 10, when Ammon is attacking us, and the people cry out to God, at the end of chapter 10, God said to the people, listen, you're worshiping all these other gods. You got 1 million other gods. How about if you call upon them to save you? Why are you constantly coming back to me when things are bad? That's what Yiftach said, right? Why do you come to me when you got trouble? So the people said, listen, do whatever you want to us. Chatanu, we have sinned. Do whatever you want to us. Save us today. So and then we have the story of Yiftach, actually. So presumably Yiftach is God's response to save us today. But it sounds like one way to read it is, give us one more chance. Okay, they got one more chance. And now we have in chapter 13, verse number 1, they continue to do evil, so God is not going to give them another chance. So there's no crying out. It doesn't fully explain, I think, why they don't cry out. You can still cry out, and God can say no. So the not crying out, I think, can be interpreted in a different way. And this we'll get to start with this next week, which is an important point, I think, for the story. And that is, the people have no interest in crying out. The people are perfectly content with the Philistines running the country.
Is it the first time that the Philistines are the rivals?
I have to think about that. They're mentioned earlier in passing, but the main rival, this is the first time. The main rival, yes, this is the first time. They are central to the book of Shmuel, obviously, they're the main, yeah. Yes?
Is not the purpose of the Philistines conquering to get slaves?
The purpose of the Philistines conquering, I don't know, they have many purposes, is to ravage the land, to take, I presume, people, to take property, to enslave them. They're doing it, what?
How could they be comfortable with that?
Well, comfortable, we don't know the extent of this, but the fact of the matter is, comfortable in the sense that, I don't know the conditions.
Status quo.
They're the ones in charge, there's no point to fight them, which they actually say explicitly later. They say to Shimshon when he makes trouble, what are you making trouble for? The Philistines are in control. Yeah, maybe someday it'll change. Right now they're in control, so we shouldn't try to fight them. I mean, we have similar statements in our tradition, such as the book of Yirmiyahu, who counsels throughout the entire book, don't fight with the Babylonians. Accept the Babylonians, could be worse, don't try to fight them. He says this over and over again for 52 chapters, basically, and he's looking at the present situation, and this is de facto what we have. In point of fact, here's what we do know: they don't cry out. And what's interesting is, even though they don't cry out, but God appoints a savior for the people. So what is that? We'll start with next week. Why does God appoint a savior for the people that don't want a savior? There's no intimation that they actually want somebody. They don't say a word. And nonetheless, we have the birth of Shimshon, and God arranges the whole thing. He sends an angel and all this. So we'll start with that. Next week. All right. So we'll stop you then. Okay.